I'm rolling, perfect. Well, welcome to Hemp Agronomy. I'm not sure if it's going to be 101 or 201 yet. Our last group had 0 hemp growers in it, which is a first for me, so that was pretty fun. Is anybody here growing hemp? George? All right. I was going to pick on you anyways, though, George. Anybody else grow hemp? So do you guys want the 101 version while we go through, or do you want me just to start at the advanced level and work way that way? Don't be afraid to ask me any questions here. All right. Sure. Yeah, and if you guys start picking on me, then I'll go to the 201. We'll do it that way. So the first trial I'm going to show you here is really a continuation of the stuff you've seen this morning with our planters. So in that pulse study, we had our air drill, which is our traditional seeder, up against the planter. And what we did was we picked our target best practice rate, and then we did a half rate. And so in this case, oh, sorry, getting ahead of myself. I guess there's 2 components to the planter studies that we really like to look at. And the one is the seed rates, because I think that can have a huge implication on how we manage the logistics. But the other factor is the safe fertilizer rates. And what happens is you go to a planter, and as you widen all your rows out, the fertilizer that goes in each row or beside each row gets more and more concentrated. And so it brings into play safety issues. So this first trial, what we're doing here is we're just looking at the safe levels of phosphorus within hemp. And so hemp is pretty sensitive to fertilizers, especially in comparison to some other crops. You may get away with 60 or 80, or we've even done demos with 100 pounds of P2O5 right in the seed row of wheat, and we can't visually see any damage. And so we're just testing the crop safety in this case. So we did 1034, which is a liquid phosphorus product. We've got 0, 10, 20, 40, and 60 kgs per hectare of P2O5. And the only data we have, because this is our first year so far, is that we collected our plant stands. And so we seeded 250 seeds per meter squared as our recommended rate. We've got about 200 or just under all the way from the beginning. So at 0, 10, 20, we've got 189, 197, probably not a big difference. The only place we really see it start to drop off is where Blaine is there, 164 plants per square meter, and that was our 60 kgs per hectare of P2O5. So, yeah.
This is product, but on the seed.
This is product. Yeah, so on that monosem that you saw, there was those liquid tubes, and right where the opening is, the phosphorus, the liquid kit just bands right down. And so while that row is open, it plops right down on the seed right on top. And so it's not necessarily coating and rolling around with it, but it's going right in the run as it's going. And so there's a certain safety built into the way it's the way it's applied as it's going. But in this case, I think we may see a little damage. It's too early to say whether that's even going to translate to a yield decrease or not, but there's potentially some problems going there. So
How much down, you said?
yeah, it's liquid 1034. Yeah.
How much water has gone down this to buffer?
I'm thinking we're at a couple inches so far, maybe 4 inches this year. Not a whole heck of a lot yet, but in addition, a little bit of rainfall. The challenge with hemp, because we have these all set up together, is that we've got a seeding rate and date trial and stuff too, so we can't water as maximally as efficient as we'd like, because we have to get back in every couple weeks and put another date or something like that down. So it's made it a little trickier logistically. I think the better buffer you have, you're going to have a little more safety. Is that what you're thinking? Or
I mean, you can get away with 200 pounds then in the seed row and that if you've got moisture.
yeah, for sure.
An inch of moisture on top of that, you're not going to smoke most crops, but
Yeah.
you get the buffering capacity of the water through it, you can do a lot of things. So that's why I was just wondering how much water you got down on this.
Yeah, as much as we can.
Are you seeing any root damage, or are you digging up any plants to check for that? I mean,
Haven't yet, no. And one other thing that we'd probably do is look at the stem thickness and whether any of the phenology of the plants themselves is being affected. So we'll be taking some height measurements, some male, female counts, and then going in with calipers and measuring the thickness of all the stems and stuff like that. So we did some other trials last year, and some of that stuff showed up in places you wouldn't necessarily expect it. So it may be their plant stand is lower, but nothing else is affected, or it may end up stunted as well. Even the ones that do survive, right, may end up smaller and stunted and things like that. So this is the very first year of this trial, and hopefully see what happens moving forward. So,
what's the physiology like the root system? Is it massive, fibrous? Or
ooh, you're getting 2.0 on me here already. I got to dig one up and see. I think hemp has pretty shallow roots, to be honest. I mean, this is just the one I pulled out, so not really much of a big long taproot, a little bit. It's a pretty small plant, I guess, but it's not really as strongly rooted as some other crops, actually. I mean, it broke a little bit off.
It won't root deep. Mike, where's your shovel?
Hey? I don't think it definitely, I don't think roots as deep as it gets tall, because you'd have roots going 14 feet down into the ground. It's not like a tree or anything like that. So
it probably doesn't have much drought tolerance?
well, yes and no. I mean, that's one of the interesting things about hemp when we get down to the variety stuff is it's really able to grow in a lot of environments. So hemp's really drought tolerant. But it also loves moisture. It also loves nitrogen. Like, it'll flourish in those environments, but it also will do reasonably well without any fertilizer, right? So that's why they were able to cultivate it for so many hundreds of years in pretty adverse conditions. So, looked like you had a question. All right.
You need a shovel because you
I do. That's your job. That's your job. See, I'm a shovel guy. That's getting into 2.0 stuff. So these 4 plots here is where I kind of started off with the segue and the planter. So here's where we recreated what we were doing with some of that other work, and we've got plots seeded with our air drill in the middle there, and then on the outside we've got them seeded with the planter, and we've done it at a 250 seeds per meter squared, or about 28 pounds an acre, which is a pretty typical recommendation. And then we've gone a half rate, and these still show quite a bit, but not as extreme as when they popped out of the ground. So the counts on here, this is our planter at 250 seeds per meter squared. You see, just like the other study, we got like 190, just about 200. That's like 80% emergence, which for hemp is pretty impressive. If we go to our air drill, sorry, walking around, 250 seeds per meter squared, we only got 112 plants per meter squared surviving. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. One of the things that happens is when we're using our air drill, the seed distribution is quite a bit different. And so one of the problems is that hemp is what's called self-thinning. And so it has its own idea of what it wants its main plant population to be. So you can really overseed or really underseed, and that'll change how much it wants to thin itself out. So we found that, say, our plant stands went on a nice chart like this, our emergence was a little bit different. It didn't follow the emergence and what we got didn't follow exactly what our seeding rates were, and that's because the higher your seeding rate, the more mortality you're going to have. Although the higher your seeding rate, you're going to have a lot of other logistical benefits. So see if you can pick out a couple in here. Like, this is a higher seeding rate, so on the edge here you'll see you get kind of these wimpy looking little plants that, you know, they'll stay like this till the end of the year and they'll turn brown and you'll just probably chop right through them, but they may not yield you anything, you know, compared to your full-sized male and female plants. So,
Are you getting any difference in the numbers of males versus females on different population?
I'm not sure. So one thing about hemp, just to maybe back up a little bit. So hemp is it's got males and females, and depending on the variety, it'll be either monoecious or dioecious, meaning in this case this is phenola. So we've got a separate male and female plant, and there's a couple bees buzzing around me here, so they're out pollinating the female plants. Your question about the numbers, this is our male right here. It's got the little pollen coming off, and these are the females. They're just starting to form buds, and so that's what'll get pollinated, and eventually seed will grow in there.
And the male is there's. What's the value of the male?
The seed. What's the value of the male? Yeah. That's right. That's what they do, and so the males will die off a little bit sooner, but they tend not to get as thick or as difficult to manage at harvest. But yeah, absolutely. And so then that's maybe a good time to walk into this variety trial and see some of the differences in varieties. So did you guys cover some of the purposes of hemp with Ted Haney? Like the grain, the biomass, CBD, things like that. So did he talk much about this variety trial?
No, he said
Okay, perfect, perfect. That's what he told me to. So this is Canadian Hemp Trade Alliance variety trial. I think they've got between 13 to 20 sites across all of Canada. And the purpose of this trial is to collect the different agronomic information from different regions across Canada, amalgamate it all. There's some nuance in some of the work groups are doing. So there's some groups looking at CBD, timing and percentages in different varieties. But the essence is to split it into some of the core purposes and just check suitability. So did he talk about variety selection and importation and stuff like that at all? So the industry itself, there isn't a huge amount of varieties that you can grow. There's only certain ones that seed companies will allow. But one of the crazy things about hemp is just how different all those varieties are. So I mean, who can tell me which wheat we're growing in behind us here? Does anybody know what that is? Okay, well, yeah, wild oats and wheat. I'm sure nobody would be able to say that that's like a Brandon wheat or a Go wheat or whatever it is, except maybe the breeders themselves, because they're pretty amazing at that. But I'm sure in a couple weeks here I could walk you through and you'd probably have a really good idea about what each of these hemp varieties are, because a lot of them look so different phenologically, and a lot of them just have different characteristics. So variety selection is important. Why? Why does variety, what are the things varieties matter for? What's that? Disease. Yield. Purpose. Yeah, purpose is the big one. End use. So we split this into a couple different trials. So one of them is the purpose. So there's a dual purpose variety trial, and then there's a grain variety trial. So the ones off to the south end there have that's for grain. The ones here are dual purpose. So we're going to have a little bit more work to do here when we go to harvest them. We're going to cut them all at the base. We're going to get a tonnage from the actual crop, and then we're going to harvest the grain and see what kind of grains they give us. In terms of CBD, there'll be, I think there's a couple sites going in taking measurements at a few different times. So they do like a tissue test. CBD tends to peak right before harvest, but depending on the variety, you know, you may have one variety you're growing for grain, you might have 2% CBD. It may not be worth it logistically or economically to worry about CBD, right? Yep.
Are these specific to the pollen of the plant of the species that is for? Like variety A uses variety A pollen, or does any pollen cross with it?
It's a good question, actually. I mean, I know for, you know, you think about seed production, canola seed production, and even cannabis production, there's pretty big intervals. Like cannabis is like 5 kilometers because the pollen can travel so far. So in terms of like having all the varieties so close, is that what you're thinking? That's a good point. I'd have to ask Ted or somebody else about that if there's a potential, yeah.
Artificially pollinating these plants, really, to get yield.
Well, if you came back in a week or two, it'd just be a nice low buzz of bees in here. I mean, we have lots of wind and lots of bees around, so.
If
Uh,
pollen A can pollinate pollen B.
That's a good question. I don't know. If you know, like this Salacia could get pollinated by the Anka or whatever. Yeah, I'm curious to find out now. So I'll have to follow up on that one.
The grain itself, it shouldn't, my little understanding with genetics, shouldn't make that much difference to the actual grain production. It would be the next.
Yeah, it'd be the next generation. You go to grow your whatever crop it is, and it'd actually be a cross of something else again, right? So
Not talking about the next generation. I just want to know if this generation.
I don't know. You've stumped me. It's everybody's homework now. Let's go do that one. That's 3. Yeah, that's.
Like on these CBDs, they say they run tests on, like who runs those tests?
Well, so there's a couple groups that have the lab equipment. So Initech Alberta has the lab equipment. You could test, I think it's about 100 to 150 bucks a sample. So if you had a whole field that you wanted to get tested, it would just depend on how much vigor you want to put into that test. So you could go in 2 weeks before harvest and take 10 samples throughout your field and run 10 tests. That might cost you $1,000. Or you could, or you could do one test for 100 and do it, might do it then and then every 5 days all the way up to when you harvest. But, like I said, depending on the variety and the season and things like that, it all changes. But there's a really kind of tight margin. So if you only get 1% CBD, it's like economically not worth it. But if you can get 2, you're laughing. And if you can get 4, you're loving it, right? So it just depends.
More, keep testing.
We don't know yet. We really don't know, and that's where part of this research is going. Is they want to find out, what does that curve look like? There's companies that'll come in. They'll come in after you've harvested your grain crop, and you see garbage in the field that you don't know what to do with, and they're like, hey, there's still CBD there that we can logistically get, and we'll help you chop it and process it and whatever we have to do, and
But if it's like cereals, a tissue test is different every day.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's different every day you take it.
Yeah, and that's the whole idea. Is your CBDs, they change every day, and you could do everything right and leave your stalk or your stubble out on the ground and get some bad weather or something come along, and it might drop you from 4 back down to 2 or something. It's pretty variable. So to be in it, the CBD guys who are in it, like in the States and other places, they're probably pretty secretive about what they know and what they tell people, and yeah, it's pretty interesting.
So there's no males in this one?
So the males and females are on the same. Okay. It's going to be the same plant here. Yeah, and this is a dual purpose. This is really the tall salacious stuff. So it's a late bloomer, for sure. And this one you can see here, we kind of take notes on when all the flowers start to show and open up and stuff. Yeah. So one other interesting thing too is somebody pointed out a couple off types before. There is an allowance in certain hemp cultivars. So you may have something that's monoecious like this, but there is a certain allowance of a few % where you may just have female plants that are in there, kind of an anomaly. So
Lygus bugs, are they a problem here in this crop?
Not really. They may be on there. You know what? We tend not to have a lot of issues for us here with disease or with insects. The one that gets us more than anything is the wildlife. And that's the birds come in, right? So these start producing just the best, tastiest little bird medley you can imagine, right? So we're just ripping by all the time with the side-by-sides and, swinging stuff in the air.
And then at harvest time, the wind.
And then the wind. So yeah, hemp is different than, well, not different, but it's a lot touchier, I'd say, than some crops. Certain cereals and stuff, you can leave them in the head for a week or 2 and nothing bad's going to happen. Hemp, the challenge with harvesting your hemp is that you have to harvest it green somewhat. If you wait till this whole plant turns brown like you would with other crops, you're literally basically harvesting rope. And that's where all the guys in their combine fires and stuff happen. So you're harvesting it pretty green, but the seed starts to turn brown a lot quicker than anything else. But it doesn't all brown up quite as nicely as other crops where it's all brown at the same time. You really kind of have to gauge where, you know, 90% of it might be ready, but you might still have some fresh stuff. And how long do you want to wait? Because if you leave it another week, you'll start to see stuff on the ground. And so, you know, if we start to see a little bit falling on the ground, that's probably time to go and get that, if not a little late. Yeah. I do want to show you guys the rate times date study because that's really cool. So what do you guys think the best seeding date is for hemp? That's a perfect answer. I mean, it really depends on what you want. And what about the seed rate? Well, I said, what do you think the best seed date is for hemp? And George says it depends on what you want. If you want your hemp to grow, you know, as tall as this stuff is behind me, or if you want it to look like this at harvest, it's going to make a big difference. And that's where all the factors of your variety selection and your seed rate and your seed date and your fertility, they all come into play. So if you're growing the tallest possible crop for biomass production and you're going to cut it, or maybe one day forage or something like that, you're going to have to do some things a lot differently. And that's where the biggest challenge for growing hemp, I think, right now is going to be, is that there's so many options, and a lot of those options aren't exclusive. So you can grow for grain and get CBD, or you can grow for grain and get fiber, or you can just grow for fiber. So, you know, your agronomy is going to have to change a lot, and depending on what you want to do, but also logistics. And sometimes, you know, logistics might trump your best agronomy just to make sure that things work out. So we've got a really interesting trial here. We've done a seeding rate trial and a seeding date trial. And if we're just looking at grain yields, in terms of maximum yields in southern Alberta, the earlier we can seed our trial, the more grain yield we're going to have, right? And in terms of seeding rate, the higher the seeding rate, the more uniform the plants are. We're going to have more of that self-thinning and probably higher plant mortality in that case, but we're going to have a lot more uniform plot. It's going to be easier to harvest logistically. So there's a lot of different things going on. So what we did with this study is we're combining the two, and we're looking for interactions between them, and we're seeing if their seeding rate or seeding date will have an implication on one versus the other. So to give you an example here, this is Salacia, which is actually our really tall fiber type variety or dual purpose variety. This is seeded June the 3rd, which is pretty late. Yeah, June 3rd. And this is our standard seeding rate we go for, 250 seeds per meter squared. This is our 400, which looks pretty amazing comparatively. Yeah, and this is irrigated. And then behind these guys here, that's our 100. So our 100 seeds per meter squared. So if we have a big catastrophe and a quarter section of something gets eaten by gophers, or, you know, we've got some insect problems, we have to reseed, you know, a lower seeding rate may be problematic. Whereas if we go and see some of our earlier stuff at a lower seeding rate, it may turn out. But again, it depends on your end use.
You haven't talked about the weeds, right?
The what?
Weed free.
Oh, the weeds. Yeah. And so,
Higher seeding rate to get rid of the weeds.
and that's a pretty classic logistics or management strategy. One of the nice things about hemp is that it competes well with weeds. And later on, yeah, early on, not so much. So getting a good burn off. This would have all had edge put down on it, and then incorporated that and then seeded on top. So the grassies.
So was that weeded? Was that weeded?
Yeah, probably. It would be interesting because to do some herbicide type and weed management type trials, right? The challenge we have logistically under the pivot is that, like I said, we kind of got to turn things off, come back. So we try to manage everything the same, but the problem is, you know, we still got to blanket our edge, we still got to cultivate, we got to do all those things. And so that's where the challenges come in. Ideally, if we put down edge right before every time, cultivated, did it, we could manage them all the same. But it's problematic that way, I guess.
Well, this was June 3rd. When were those seeded?
This would have been seeded, well, it says normal. So yeah, about the 20th May. And then our early seeded stuff are the ones where these guys are getting lost in there. That would have been like the 8th or 10th of May. So we actually got a perfect 2-week interval on each one.
You don't have to worry about rain.
No.
That's a good question because drought tolerance, how are they? You said they're pretty good, but say a dry year like we've had the last 3 without irrigation, how do they do?
I'm trying to think back. I think our first year we grew them without irrigation. So that had been 5 or 6 years ago across the road there. And they did okay. It's I guess what metrics do you want? I mean, they survived. We got a decent yield, but I'm thinking we were like closer to 500 to 1,000 pounds an acre maybe, whereas our irrigated stuff might go 3,000. But that's the benefit of it. How much of that is irrigation versus not, and how much of that is, you know, hemp versus the other crops that we had? It's hard to say. It's a pretty long time ago, but they did survive just fine.